Hello, I'm Stuart Baker, Managing Director of Maritime UK Solent. Delighted to be here today for a Maritime UK Solent podcast. And we have with me today Chris Sturgeon, who's our first ever Maritime Hero from our Maritime UK Solent 2022 awards, our inaugural awards, which took place in October 22. And also here with Clive Thomas, who's Commercial Director of Solent Stevedores, who were the fantastic sponsor of our Maritime Hero Award today. So we're going to have a conversation, find a bit more about the maritime sector here in the Solent and the experience that Chris has had that led to him being Maritime Hero. So Chris, tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm founder and Managing Director of Red Penguin. Red Penguin Marine is a consultancy that I set up in 2005. I'm a former master mariner, spent 40 years at sea, 40 years in the maritime industry, and 30 plus years now in the submarine cable industry. And that's what we do.
Yeah. Master mariner, because part of the work we do is trying to get young people into the maritime sector. What is a master mariner?
So somebody who studied to take their captain's exams.
Right. Okay.
And I've been fortunate enough to command ships at sea. So I've used the training and the experience that I've gathered to command ships. Cable ships, I started with RFA, went on to merchant proper cargo ships, dry cargo, and with Jardines, and then joined Cable and Wireless in '88, and learned about cable laying and a whole career associated with that.
That's fascinating. It's interesting, isn't it? Because the maritime sector is so broad, and I remember when we sort of looked at the applications for Maritime Hero and seeing the sort of experience and that length of experience that you said in cable laying. It's so important to infrastructure of every country, isn't it? Really, connection, and it was just an area of maritime. I thought, oh, yeah, of course, yeah, that's.
It is. I'd say most of us don't really think about it outside of the industry. But we were talking about it the other day in-house, and we just thought these threads, these cables, the fibre optic cables and the power cables, which are becoming more prolific, they're the threads that make up the fabric of modern society.
Absolutely.
It's out of sight, but it's underpinning everything that we do.
Yeah. And if I was a young person and I wanted to get into a career in that, I mean, how would you even go about that? I mean, do you start with the maritime route to get that experience, or with computers and digitization these days, is there more of a kind of digital route? What kind of skills would I need to get into that sector?
There's something for everybody in the submarine cable industry. It depends which bit you want to do and what your skill sets are. But we've got a dentist in the team.
Really?
We have a travel agent in the team. They're not on the technical side, but they are supporting the business. And very few people come into the submarine cable industry as submarine cable engineers.
Okay.
But whether you're a mariner to undertake operations at sea, whether you're an engineer to plan and perhaps take under operations at sea, naval architects, IT, transmission engineers, electricians, electrical engineers, oceanographers, environmental scientists, geomorphologists, geologists, you name it. There's something for everybody in there.
Yeah.
Even the lawyers and accountants that we have within the industry start to become part of the industry, and everybody's involved because it touches everything. And so it's a fascinating sector to be in.
Chris, it's intrigued a number of us in the team, and I'm sure Clive as a sponsor of the Maritime Hero Award. Why Red Penguin? Where does that name come from?
When I first started out on my own, I was a kitchen table consultant, one-man band, and I thought at the end of my first job, which happened to be out in the Caribbean, I was sitting on a beach at the end of the job thinking, right, I'm going to have to start a company just to look after my own liabilities and do the thing that all kitchen table consultants do. So I thought of a name. Marine consultants could be anything. There are so many marine consultants, and they're all sorts of disciplines, but there are lots of them as well. So I thought, okay, it needs to stand out from the crowd. And that's what it was. It's an expert in challenging environments. I'm a birder, and I've got a keen interest in polar exploration. So my thoughts just led down that line, and I could see a ice sheet with some penguins on it, and I thought, well, a red one would stand out, and that will do.
Yeah. How about that? Yeah, well, thank you. That's intrigued a number of us, so that is really helpful. Thank you. Certainly stands out as well.
Hopefully not forgotten.
No, definitely not. No. Clive, thank you again from Maritime UK Solent for sponsoring the award. It's so important for us to make that award ceremony work. Why did you want to be a sponsor of the Maritime UK Solent Awards?
I think people outside of the industry don't necessarily, understand the contribution that it makes to the region. And we support over 40,000 jobs. It's a huge number in terms of the value add to the region. And it can go a bit under the radar because people take for granted when you live in a sort of coastal environment or a port city that there's just this thing there. And people don't often realise the breadth that's there within the maritime sector. So I think being involved with the work that you're doing and being involved in sponsoring the awards, just anything really that can help raise the profile and make people realise the breadth of experiences that are potentially available to people if they just realise what's there. And, we just got to shout about it a bit more. And I think, being involved with the award ceremony was the start of that for us, and something that I think, we'll gladly do a lot more of.
That's great, and as I say, it makes such a difference to making that awards a success. Having really key maritime local businesses involved in our awards is brilliant because it brings others in as well. Your Solent Stevedores really important for the local economy. Lots of connections within the supply chain. Can you tell us a bit more about Solent Stevedores? I always remember hearing the word Stevedores for the first time and thinking, I need to Google that. And if I was a kid out there, I'd probably have to Google it as well. So tell us about Solent Stevedores and the kind of work that you do here in Southampton.
Sure. So Stevedores essentially is quite a simple concept. It's essentially moving something from there to there. And, that's ultimately what the business is about. But that's the simplistic view of it. What lies behind that is obviously a lot more complex and involves a lot of different roles and a lot of different opportunities for people to be involved. But Solent Stevedores essentially has its main sort of centre of activity in the Southampton area, and hence the name. It was driven and sort of grown out of this port. And the operations here involve handling the baggage of probably somewhere in the region of about 1.6 million passengers a year that pass through on the cruise ships in the port. We also do the stores management for the cruise lines as well that we work with. We run a container storage and maintenance and repair depot, which has a rail terminal running 7 daily rail services connecting the port with the inland network of the UK. We have a thriving bulk terminal, which handles close on 1.5 million tonnes of a variety of products. So, anything feeding into the construction sector, feeding into the agricultural markets, exporting recycled goods. So it's a very, very broad base of things that we do here. And sort of from this hub in Southampton, the business has grown now to operate. We handle all the raw sugar for Tate and Lyle on the Thames, that goes into, household name. We've got another container facility at London Gateway, another large container port, and we have another little operation up in the Port of Immingham handling cement products. So it's diversified from its original base here to cover those sort of mainland UK locations. Equally, in the last few years, it's expanded to take on the operations at St Helier in Jersey. We have a new business in St Malo in Brittany, and building on the work we do with the cruise lines in Southampton, we also have a business in Singapore that handles all the cruise vessels there in terms of their baggage. So it's become quite a little diversified business, employing about 300 people directly now.
I actually had no idea it had grown that big, and that's brilliant, and all from Southampton as well. And I think that's one of the things, isn't it? I mean, the Solent has such expertise in maritime, and it's an export product, isn't it? Whether it's deep sea cable expertise, whether it's stevedores expertise, it's something that we're really good at here in the Solent, and we can export to the world. So it's great for UK PLC. We are an island nation after all, so it's kind of in our blood, isn't it? So it's fantastic to hear everything about that.
I've got to ask a question.
Yeah.
How old is the business?
20 years.
20 years. So Pirelli closed down. Yeah, you weren't coiling cable, but some of your stevedores would have coiled cable down at the Pirelli and the STC factories.
Yep.
Yeah. Because we had a cable port here.
Yeah.
The BT Marine were based here.
It's where IKEA is now, isn't it?
The Pirelli factory is IKEA. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but they were all down by the graving dock.
That's right. Yeah.
Because there was the
BT
bridge that
was
went
down
across
there.
the road, wasn't
that's
there?
right.
With
Yeah,
the cable
came over it. Yeah.
Well, that King George graving dock, is part of our bulk operation
Is
now.
it
So
now?
we do aggregates on one side and recycled scrap on the other.
Okay.
So when it finished its life as a dry dock, it was new birth, if you like.
What are the berth numbers down there? 103?
So 109.
109.
Going into KGV and then round onto
7, 8 and 9.
So what was old 201 as well, with a lot of activity there. That's now SCT5, part of the container terminal. So.
Right. So we used to come in there on the cable ship.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when that cable, because I'm fascinated, I'm from Southampton, so I kind of remember that history. Those cables that were made at Pirelli, were they constantly being made, and then were they going onto ships, or were they going straight into the sea?
They would have had some storage bins.
Yeah.
But as soon as they're starting to fill up, and part of the logistics of the manufacturing process is to put that into the ship. So your timing of installation and transportation of the product to be installed somewhere else that's the big part of the manufacturing process, is that logistics, and making sure you don't hold the factory up. You got to keep a clean path, like cash flow, keep it moving.
And that cable goes onto the ships and then goes off to where it's got to be laid.
Exactly. Yeah. And then there's a whole process in front of that of designing the route and surveying the route to put it on.
That's the piece, isn't it? Really, yeah. That's where all those jobs that you mentioned earlier come into it, isn't it? Around it's the oceanographers,
that's right,
geologists,
all in the planning. Yeah.
Are there cables that? This is a really naive question. But are there cables that connect Europe to the USA that go under the sea? So what about that kind of mid-Atlantic ridge? What happens there?
Well, you survey it.
Yeah. Okay.
You have to know the shape of the ground. Cable's expensive.
Yeah.
So you have to know the shape of the ground to fill it in. You want it to lay on the seabed. You don't want suspensions, but you don't want too much.
Yeah.
Because you might have it's just wasting it and it's expensive. So you've got to get it in the right place, and then at different points the cable is armoured to a certain degree to cope with the environmental conditions that you've got, and in the shallower water where there's fishing and other anchoring risk. Then you're armouring the cable and up-armouring, so you're increasing the armour protection on it, which makes it heavier and bigger. But that's, again, expensive. So at a certain point, when that risk starts to fade away, you want to transfer into a lighter cable. And then again, when you get to the other side, so the mid-Atlantic ridge is generally a lightweight or a small lightweight protected with a plastic sheath on it. Yeah. And then when you get to the other side, you come up into armour again, into the shelf and then onto the beach.
That's fascinating. It really is. It's not just simply chucking a cable down on the bottom of the seabed, is it, at all? There's so much more that goes into it, isn't it? Really?
There is. And I think that's what's fascinating about it, because the installation process is one thing, and there's a huge amount of skill involved in delivering the cable as a quality product onto the seabed that's going to last its design life, which might be 20 to 50 years, depending on the type of cable. But the whole process of engineering that, whether it's a power interconnector from here to Norway or here to Denmark, as we're constructing at the moment, or a fibre system around Africa that we're involved in. It's a different ballgame, and whether that takes 5 years in the planning or a year in the planning depends on the type of cable and where you are in the world.
Yeah, so I suppose in the UK we've got a growing sort of network of offshore wind, which is great as we all try to work towards that net zero ambition. I suppose that's brought with it quite a bit of work for deep sea cable laying, hasn't it?
Massive amount of work, it has, because every one of those turbines is connected. And then you've got to bring and deliver the generated power ashore. And then once you've brought it ashore, it's then got to be distributed elsewhere. And because you can't stop the wind when you don't need it, the interconnection and the sharing of power and the balancing of grid load requires the interconnection as well across Europe. And so we're building these interconnectors, one of which came up with Solent, which we were involved in for National Grid and RTE in France not so long ago.
That's fascinating, isn't it? So there's plenty of work out there, and I think that whole digital piece as well. I mean, we're more connected every day than ever, aren't we? And that connection is vital for every part of everyone's job, really.
98%, I would think. It's certainly more than 95, and I've heard 98%, but I'm no statistician, of what you see on your computers, your phones, devices, comes through cable.
Wow. That's crazy, isn't it? Yeah, so it's vital.
It is vital.
Vital for the digital world that we live in.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Chris, you are our first Maritime Hero, which is fantastic for you, fantastic for us, and you've been a great winner of that award. I think the speech was fantastic. It looked as though it was a shock to you. Did you know that you'd been nominated for Maritime Hero by your team?
Not until the week before, and. I was shocked, but I thought, okay, well, that's nice of you, but that's really going to disrupt my day. So I don't want to think about that. And anyway, what is a hero? So, but first I thought, okay, I dismissed it, to be honest, and then they told me that that the award ceremony was coming up the following week, which actually coincided with a wedding I was at down in Cornwall, so I had to come up for that. But they'd made the effort and believed in the nomination, and I never saw the nomination until only about a week ago. So a month after the event. But I had to look up hero and see what it meant, because I wasn't sure, and I hadn't seen the nomination, I hadn't seen anything to do with it at the time. What is a hero, Clive? In this context, for me, it's a serviceman. Some of them didn't come back from conflicts, and some came back. That's a real hero. I wouldn't put myself in that bracket by any means. So I had to look it up, but it'd be interesting to know from you what it.
Sure, and I think what was really interesting about the Maritime Hero category within the awards was the range of nominations that we actually had, and there were really, impressive events that had taken place and acts of what we would probably see as heroic acts of masters of vessels that had avoided issues occurring in trying conditions and things like that. And so on the face of it, you'd look at it and think, well, actually that's the kind of heroic effect that we've had. But I think what the panel and what I think the whole kind of process was looking for was somebody who had a really significant impact on the maritime sector here in the Solent, had delivered successful businesses, had nurtured and brought on lots of different people with different skill sets in the sector, and in turn had seen those people move on into businesses globally, sort of championing and taking forward the whole kind of development of the Solent piece and really broadcasting it to the wider world. And I think it was really in recognition of the work you've done over all of the years in the different businesses and with that sort of focus of somebody who's made a really impressive impact on the Solent maritime economy. That was the sort of view of the panel at the time, to say, this is Chris is the guy. This is how we should go with this award.
I think if I'd known that at the time, I was told, it would have helped me understand the nomination. But I'm very proud to accept it on that basis and to have won it. I think it's we have achieved that. The team and no individual can do this. You have to do it as part of a team, and I learned that at sea as part of the maritime training. That a ship is only as good as the team and the way it performs. There's no individuals other than as components of the team. So the team have done this. I lead the team, and if I've been able to inspire them to do that and for us to achieve what we have, that's fantastic. So I'm proud of that. And thank you for the award and for sponsoring it.
And worthy winner.
Yeah, absolutely worthy winner. And I think in the conversations I've sort of had with you, I mean, that word team comes up a lot from you. And I think that's really important. And I think, as Clive said, I think you're clearly invested in your team and invested in the sector as well. And a growing business here in the Solent as well, creating jobs. I mean, that's what we want from our maritime sector. We want to keep pushing, and some of the kind of roles that you've talked about there. This is it's innovative as well, isn't it? There's new things happening as well, and I suppose you have that experience and you can lead that change, can't you, for the future? I mean, what do you think the future holds for deep sea cable?
More,
yeah,
which is a challenge because technology is changing. The need for cable, the scope for it, the demand for moving cables. If you take power cables, for instance, in deep water, the difference between where you can put a cable, telecoms fibre optic cable into or data cable, we've laid those in 9,000 metres of water, but power cables at the moment are restricted to under 2,000 metres. Just physically and through the engineering. So there's definitely a future for taking that further, and that will change the economy, I imagine, on different places. Hot islands will be able to move power from, take Hawaii, from geothermal sources into where the population is. But at the moment, the bit in between is too deep. And maybe in places like the Caribbean where you've got hurricanes, they can share power so that when one island's knocked out with a hurricane, the other one nearby can support it. So there's sort of resilience to build into that. We have resilience in the fibre optic network, massive resilience globally, but in the power system, not so much. And with the needs for sustainability and being able to use renewable resources for generating power, the importance of it for the future is really, really significant.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'd not really appreciated that point, but I suppose, you're absolutely right. I mean, as we have to sort of, work on that pathway to net zero, getting the energy from source of renewable energy in particular, whether that's solar, whether it's wind, whether it's tidal, to those places that demand it, because there's often a mismatch, is critical, isn't it? So that is, I mean, it's part of our journey towards net zero. Deep sea cable is absolutely front and center of that, isn't it, to make those connections?
It is, yeah. It has to be part of that infrastructure. It is essential. And then the communication, the way we operate, the economics of the world is all, and the way we communicate now is all linked to that as well. So the two of them are hand in hand, and the control systems for the energy systems also flow down the data systems, the data cable. So they're integrated, and everything these days is part of that system. So yeah, it is absolutely essential. And innovations are happening all the time, whether they be big technical innovations or small ones in just minor improvements. I think for me, innovation also has to be how we use our knowledge. Those of us that have come from the more manual, pre-digital age, and the ways of doing things, and the experiences that we've gained, and the value of the training that we've had, hands-on experience. A lot of the people in the future are not going to have opportunity to gain that. So how do we transfer that knowledge to the new? And that's in every walk of life. It's really, really essential in ours, and certainly in the maritime industry. The seafarers learn hands-on, learn to respect the sea, learn all the things that you do at sea about the environment and the importance of understanding the weather and understanding the operations on ships, in ports, integrated safety, and it's inherent in the way you work. All of those things, and then a quality process. So you've got to build that lot somehow into transferring that knowledge to the digitally capable for the future, and how they're going to do it without that degree of experience of spending 30 years at sea.
It's true, isn't it? And I suppose lifestyle changes as well, isn't it? I mean, 30 years at sea is quite a commitment on anybody's life, isn't it? And particularly young people growing up, probably not used to having that time away from connectivity, I suppose, really. So it's a new world, isn't it? And I suppose it is because we still need those people coming in. We need that talent pipeline, and these are probably pretty good jobs, well paid jobs as well, and sound pretty interesting to me as well. Clive, you've been involved in the sector for a while. You're clearly very successful in the sector. How did you get into it, and what's your journey been to get where you are today?
Yeah, okay. Well, my journey started actually at Southampton University, so very local. I was a geography graduate, and part of my experience of being in the city, obviously you can't miss the port. So during one of the units I undertook, it actually went down the direction of looking at port cities in the UK, and ABP at the time very kindly sort of gave us a very in-depth tour of the port and gave us sort of behind-the-scenes views of some of the VTS operations and some of the other things. And I think it just grabbed me at that point as somewhere that was quite an exciting environment to be involved in. So from there, I actually joined ABP on their graduate training program, during which time I spent some time up in Humberside working in the ports there. I actually came back to Southampton for a period and enjoyed time out with the marine team, looking after the Southampton patrol launch and working with the pilot service and everything else. So getting that full kind of breadth of the port experience, if you like, locally. And from there, I then went to work in the South Wales ports. ABP have 5 ports in Wales. So I spent 15 years of my life in Wales looking after each of the 5 ports at some point in my life, but getting a chance to see, some of the steel industry and working with the imports and exports of coal products and other types of bulks that we don't see so often down in this part of the world. And then I came back to Southampton in 2012, took on the role of port manager in Southampton. And in the last sort of 5 years of my time in the port sector, I was working as head of commercial and property for the port, looking after some of the strategic development objectives around the land holdings here. And I joined Solent Stevedores in August 21 as commercial director there, and it's been really interesting actually to see a completely different perspective of what is in a sense the same kind of area of port operations.
That's fascinating, and that's a wealth of experience over those years. What kind of changes have you seen in the maritime sector, in the port sector, obviously, which you're very familiar with, but more broadly as well?
Yeah, I think joining in the sort of 1990s, it was a relatively long-lived and fairly stable industry. As I said before, ultimately you're moving something from A to B, and how you actually undertake that is really where you've seen a lot of the changes happening in the way that ports operate. And I think if I could, sum up the sort of key changes that have happened in my sort of 25 years industry, it would be initially around embracing automation and seeing the way that ports are looking at laying out storage areas and finding ways to, in effect, driven by the safety agenda, to try and take people out of risky situations. So that's what sort of really drove the automation processes originally. In more recent times, it's been very much around digitization of activities. As trading environments get more complex, ports are embracing technologies like blockchain to move documents seamlessly across borders. There's been a lot of focus on things like the Internet of Things and getting data from assets so that assets can almost teach you about things that they need in terms of being looked after, repair cycles, maintenance cycles. So what looks like a relatively simple industry when you look at it from the outside in, where you see the big infrastructure, the big cranes, what sort of lies behind that has been an awful lot more in terms of having to embrace the innovation and having to sort of look at smarter ways to operate. We're now at a point where you can assess compound occupancy by putting drones in the air. They can size compounds, they can look at piles of cargo and tell you how much is there. And I guess the next stage from that will be AI. So these things are active all the time, and you've got a constant view of things in real time.
And I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, it really is. And the whole Internet of Things of assets giving you information about how they're performing, what they need, almost human-like in a way. Connectivity is key for that. So we come back to the cables, which becomes really important. Obviously, satellite technology, it all comes together, doesn't it? And I guess that brings efficiencies as well, doesn't it? And we've talked a bit around the environment and decarbonisation. And has that been a feature of the sort of change you've seen over the last sort of 15, 20 years in the port sector?
Definitely. I think, from the sort of actually operating, there's been, a drive for cleaner drivetrains, different fuels, emerging opportunities to use infrastructure in different ways that is significantly cleaner in terms of the impact it has on the environment. But ports have also had to react to the wider change in the economy. So, we were talking earlier about offshore wind, and the requirements now to develop that. It started with onshore wind. It started with blade handling and tower handling and nacelles and everything else that you need for that industry being brought into the UK. So ports have had to adapt the type of cargo that they're handling as well to embrace that green economy. And I think that's just going to continue with, the advent of hydrogen and other things. A lot of this stuff has to really happen in marine environments because of the sheer scale of what you need to bring in and take out with those sort of processes. So ports are very much central to that and continue to play a huge part in that greening of the economy.
What we keep hearing from businesses is we can train them up, but I just want people to be able to have those basic things of turning up on time, being polite, and it's those kind of, and I don't want to be an old person think, kids are all miserable today and they're horrible, because they're not. But there's this, it's actually some of those basic skills that someone who's in Millbrook Council estate can think, well, I'm crap at school, but I can turn up on time. It's like I can go and get a job there because that's what you want, isn't it? Of that kind of thing. So it's open to anybody, because that's the whole levelling up thing then, isn't it, really, of how local people can get a job locally, really, and they don't have to think, I have to be I think a geophysicist or something, isn't it?
It's definitely true of the port sector. I mean, you look at the guys that work in our business, we've got a large number of our managers started on the tools, if you want to put it in that sort of frame, really. I mean, they've worked through, they've gained the different skills of working across different cargoes, different types of machinery. They've become multi-skilled operatives, and from there, they've decided, they've got, a desire to move on. They've gone through the sort of supervisory piece of looking after the development of others. And then from that supervisory role, they've moved into the management side of the business. It's quite a flat structure, really, that we operate in terms of our business. And, you can definitely see throughout the company people that have, started through the apprenticeship route. You can see guys that have just joined initially thinking that they were going to be handling some baggage on cruise ships. But, they've moved up and through, and they've shown that desire to learn the different skills and the different opportunities that are there in the roles. And that's really fed what is essentially an operational business with good quality people who have been, able to embrace the different skill sets that are required to fulfill the roles. And then on the other side of it, as I mentioned, it's becoming increasingly a, digitized business. So you need a whole suite of different skills, it's opened up the business to, to people who might not necessarily feel like they want the outside life in terms of some of the operational side of the business, but it's just a whole range of different opportunities now, just driving the systems that make everything else tick. So there's so many opportunities in this sector, and just within our business, just a full range of jobs from the engineering fitting side of things through to, somebody who can really genuinely drive programming and understand the digital economy as well. So
I think, that's fascinating. So there is almost something for everybody, which I think, Chris, you talked about earlier, isn't there? No matter what your background is, where you've come from, what your educational ability is, I suppose there's something about some core skills, and you've talked around determination, dedication. What other skills do you think, either of you, are kind of important that you're really looking for in that young person coming into your industry?
For me, it's motivation. If you can present a motivated person, if they present themselves with that desire to get involved and to be part of something, and that doesn't have to be part of the company for all of your life. It's be part of the industry or the development of sustainable energy or whatever it is. But the motivation to get involved. Once you've got that motivation, then there's a willingness learn, to listen. And I think one thing I see from people younger than I, new people coming into the business and into the industry, but certainly the younger generation that are coming in now, is to question everything. And that's great. And we encourage that because that's what engineering is. I'm not sure if I said it, but I'm a navigator by trade and an engineer by experience. But it's that process of taking seamanship and engineering and applying it to, in our world, into cables, requires questions. It requires you to challenge assumptions, but that's just good practice. Don't accept everything that's in front of you and understand why, because that bit of innovation that we talked about might be actually there's another way of doing this, and just because we've always done it that way isn't the right way to do it necessarily.
And I think you talked about it doesn't have to be those big innovations, like a new version of a mobile phone. It can be something tiny, but actually all those little tiny innovations can actually generate significant change, whether it's more efficient ways of doing things or whatever. But yeah, motivation, that's fascinating. How about you, Clive?
I would say something very similar. It's about having the drive, the motivation, and the desire to learn. And we were very fortunate to have one of our apprentices nominated for an award at the award ceremony. And Phoebe's a perfect example of that within our business, of somebody who's come in and has done exactly that. She's questioned things, driven to try and make an impact on the sector. And I've got absolutely no doubt that she'll be hugely successful in whichever direction she chooses to go in the future.
Brilliant. And that's all from an apprenticeship, isn't it, really? So,
which is interesting because we've just started working with Portsmouth City Council to take on an apprentice project management apprenticeship. So we're working to leverage that scheme. And in taking one, we've offered a position to somebody this last week. One of our young graduates has asked if he can go on the scheme as well.
Really?
So we said yes.
Very interesting.
So that's because just because he's got a degree doesn't stop him doing an apprenticeship. There's actually a skill to learn there to develop himself into a rounded individual for the industry, for whatever it is he's going to do in the future. But for us right now, it'll be project engineering and supporting the operations team. We'll get him offshore. He's already been out on site, loaded a cable, landed a shore end, and it won't be long before we get him offshore. But one of the innovations we're using is to start. We're talking about AI and technology. Is to use these glasses, these sort of remote glasses with the cameras in them and an iPad in the lens, so that we can connect back to our base, and we can put the youngsters out who don't perhaps have all that experience, and eventually they'll be able to get in the field, and then they've got backup. So there's a sort of remote backup without being there. And we can get an old hand, maybe grandfather or grandmother, 3 or 4 youngsters who are out there doing it, knowing they've got somebody looking over their shoulder and backing them up.
So that gives them the reassurance, and it's embracing digital capability, I suppose, to support learning, really, out in the field, when before you'd have had to taken people out there to give them that, which is resource intensive, expensive, and I suppose giving that young person or whoever they are that kind of confidence, that independence, almost forces you to learn, doesn't it? So digitization and technology really, really helping. What an innovation!
And it wouldn't have been possible, I think, without the advances in technology, but also without understanding them. And because we've been taking undergraduates on a placement scheme with universities, I think we've done two with Southampton, with Portsmouth, and they understand the tech. I struggle with it. I'll hold my hand up. But we've got the people who can, and that's really important. That diversity that you have in the team, age, skills, knowledge, ways of thinking, all of that, and we all, different people have different ways of doing it. So the team is part of, or the team is built by the people in it, and bringing the undergraduates in. They're not qualified yet. They're not trained yet, but actually they've got a great way of thinking because they're in the middle of learning, and they're questioning us. Why are you doing that? Oh, I don't know. I'll have to think about that.
Which is what you want, isn't it?
It is,
there a better way?
Challenge me. Yeah, and I invite them to challenge all of us. Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting. You look at what some people might perceive as being maritime, and a lot of people would look at what, living in a city like Southampton, you see the port. That's one view that people have of maritime. I've learned a lot today, I have to say. But equally, I think in being involved in the award ceremony and looking at some of the other people that were involved and some of the innovations that are going on, you just realise what an incredibly innovative and technologically focused sector it actually is. It is the right home for all the people with the IT skills and the digital skills and everything. And maybe that's what people don't necessarily see at the first sight when they live and grow up in a city, not even knowing that those opportunities exist.
I think you're right, Clive. And if you go back to my maritime background, my marine background, should we say, there were certain paths open to you. You could stay at sea, you could go into stevedoring, ship brokerage, law. Those avenues are still open, but there's many more now as well. The basic skills that you learn in any trade, but certainly for me, going to sea was a fantastic experience. You are faced with so much, you learn so much, and you have to deal with so much. But it's a really good grounding, and the training and the exposure that you get, the responsibility that you get, and I'm sure it's the same in most maritime businesses, will set you up for life in whatever you want to do. It gives a really good grounding.
Yeah, I think some of the things that have come out of the conversation we've had have been the value of a team and the roles that everybody can perform in that team. It's not one individual. And actually learning on the job as well seems to be really important as the best way to really excel in an industry. But that's been fascinating. Clive, we're in the process of planning our next award ceremony in 2023. We've had some really positive feedback from this year. Do you think you, Solent Stevedores, will get involved in our 2023 awards?
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely critical that we continue to shout from the rooftops about this sector, and through things like the awards and the categories that are there, it really does showcase the range and scope of what this industry is. So yes, we'll be involved.
That's great to hear. And Chris, probably not Maritime Hero next year, unless you might get it 2 years running. Who knows? But would you like Red Penguin to be involved in some capacity next year?
Definitely, and I wouldn't want to hog the limelight. And I think once is enough. That recognition is immense. I'm very proud of it. I'm proud of the team that have helped me achieve that. I have been asked already to judge, which I've agreed to judge a category, which I will do for the next event. I would say that definitely it is something that the UK should be doing. We're an island nation. The maritime sector is really, really important. It's the lifeblood of the country. We're part of it within the submarine cable industry. That is another bit, and it's a great opportunity to showcase that industry as part of the maritime sector on a global basis with the local content. And that's not just here in Solent, but moving on to the next awards, Maritime UK generally, or the other ports that where there is a submarine cable industry sector involvement, and that's growing. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to be involved, and thank you to Maritime UK Solent and Solent Stevedores. Thank you.
Chris, Clive, it's been a pleasure to talk with you this morning. Thank you ever so much for your time. Thank you for being our first Maritime Hero, Chris, and thank you, Clive and Solent Stevedores for being the sponsor of that award. Really been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I certainly have. I've learnt loads today. If you have, then please follow us across different social platforms at Maritime UK Solent. Thank you.